All right, so we're here in Matthew. And just as a quick update, y'all haven't been in my class. And so if you haven't been familiar with Matthew, haven't looked at Matthew in a little while, I want to kind of walk you through just a few things about this gospel message from the Apostle Matthew. A lot of the things that he tried to bring out in the first couple of chapters in the opening of this book are drawn on him pointing out that Jesus was not just another prophet. Jesus was not just another great teacher, but he was someone vitally important, not only to the people of Israel at the time, but to all people as part of God's plan. He's going to use a lot of kingdom language, pointing out that Jesus was going to be a king greater than any king that had ever come before. But he was the king that we all needed and desired and God wanted us to have. So there's a lot of kingdom language going on, establishing Jesus as something greater. There's a lot of fulfillment language happening. And by that, I mean literally, Matthew says, such and such happened to fulfill, and then he matches it up with an Old Testament prophecy. So if you were to read through the first 4 chapters, you could find a lot of the instances where that fulfillment language is used. So now not only is this something promised, but this is something that has been planned for a long period of time. And Matthew lays that out over and over and over again. The other thing that is really neat to notice as you read through is how many times Matthew draws a supernatural line through the early life of Christ. So it's not just happenstance that he went from here to here. It's not happenstance that he was born to these people. It was all planned and guided and cared for and overseen. So, for instance, we have the story of when the angel came and talked to Joseph about the birth. Okay, that's pretty supernatural for an angel to come and announce something to someone, right? Then we have when he left for Egypt, or when he was brought out of Egypt. And both times it was through a messenger and through a prophecy and through a vision, all these different things where it's God guiding this path of his son early in his life. Even to the point of when he comes to John the Baptist and he's baptized and all the people are around, and then what happens? But the sky opens up and the Spirit in the form of the dove comes, and so everyone sees and then hears God's voice saying, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." So we have all of these things over and over happening, and now Jesus is firmly on the scene at this point. Matthew doesn't spend a whole lot of time with the early life of Christ. He kind of hits a few high points and gets us going, ready for this ministry that's about to happen. But before the ministry happens, he goes out and is tempted. And at the end of the temptation, after he has encountered the devil and talked with him and rebuked him several times, rebuffed his advances and promises of all these other things, and Jesus has said, no, that's not who I'm going to be, and he's shown him in Scripture who he was going to be. After all of that, who comes and takes care of him but the angels once again. So we have all of these things happening in the early writings of Matthew that show that Jesus is not your normal guy. He's not your normal teacher, your normal prophet. He's not your normal established king. But he is someone of importance, and that's what Matthew is trying to establish in this so far. He says, this is someone for you to pay attention to. And then by the time we get here to chapter 5, it's the first time we get Jesus' teachings. And so Jesus is having the opportunity. All the people have gathered around. It's people that have started to hear about him, people that had followed John the Baptist that were now following Jesus. And he sits them down and he starts to talk to them. And so what I want us to explore today is, what did he choose to talk to them about first? What did Jesus try to tell them that was going to be vitally important? Out of all the things he could talk to them, what does he go for first? Okay? But before we look at what Jesus talks to them about, I want us to consider some things about our own self today. If I was to ask you, how would you describe a good life? Okay? How would you describe the good life? I want you to be thinking about that, but knowing that I was going to be in the auditorium and knowing that even in a small group, if I ask that question, sometimes people like to think about things a little bit. I did some background work for you, so maybe you can compare what you're thinking to the things that I'm going to show on the screen here in just a second, okay? How would you describe the good life? Well, first off, if you remember a song called Fortunate Son by CCR, by Creedence Clearwater Revival, the great, prophets of old. No, yeah. Now I know you're awake. Good deal. You know, sometimes on a Sunday morning you settle in and everyone's getting comfortable. Okay, but here we go. If you're familiar with this song, you can be thinking about the lyrics of it, but he was essentially looking at the problems of the day and going, well, here are the good things in life. Here are the people who don't have problems. Here's how all the things would be solved and better off if it was like this. If I had lots of money, if I had political power, if I had a comfortable home or a comfortable lifestyle, if I could avoid hardship and avoid sacrifice, that would be the good life, you know? Again, you think back through the lyrics of that, he's going, man, the tax man shows up and I don't even have anything to give him, but he's going to take the last thing that I had. That means that I'm not living a very good life. My life is not as good as it could be. I'm about to be sent off to endure hardship while all these other people, they've got the silver spoons and they don't have to deal with any of that. That's the good life. Why can't I live that life? You know? So you can picture that. And that's been a pretty common theme, okay? A lot of people would describe that in very similar ways. It may be just a different setting or a different time in life, different political settings, whatever it may be. But that's one description of the good life. All right? Now, if I go to this next one, I talked to a lot of my friends and family in a wide variety of places. Not all of them are Christians, some are. And I asked them that question. I said, what would you describe as the good life? And they sent me back a wide variety of responses. And I kind of looked through them and found similar themes that kept popping up. So now here's some of the ideas from just this past month of how people would describe a good life, okay? I gave them no other setup. I didn't say, hey, if you read this passage and then, or based on all this other stuff, what would you say? I just said, you know, what's the good life? Of course, naturally, in curiosity ways, you would be the same. You would send back all the different, how do I clarify this? What are you really looking for? Am I supposed to make this a Christian answer? And I was like, no, 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 this is just your answer, okay? So here we go. Number one, the number one thing that kept popping up was healthy relationships, okay? That's the number one desire. If you have a good life, you're going to have good relationships with the people around you. Now, that may be your friends, your family, who knows what that may be. But healthy relationships, number one. Number two, financial stability in the here and now, okay? In the here and now, you've got enough money to take care of the things you need to take care of. That's a good life. Number three, here we go, freedom and peace. So we want to be away from people who are going to pester us. We don't want to be put down by anybody in particular. We want to be able to do the things we want to do when we want to do them and have the comfort to live that out without really much, friction in our life, okay? Freedom and peace. Here we go. The next one, spirituality and service. Now, again, I surveyed a lot of different people, so not everyone saw this as like serving of Christ, but there was some sense of a higher power at work in the world around us in some way. But that usually was focused on caring for others, okay? So, a good life would be if you knew there was something greater at work, and because of that, you cared for those around you. So, in general, there wasn't a lot of, I can do it alone and I'm never going to mess with anybody else. Part of a good life had some connection to somebody else, and you gained some self worth through what you did for those around you. It's a pretty positive thing to hear from a wide audience of people, right? Keep going. Personal fulfillment and experiences. Man, a good life is if you can go out and take that trip you want to do. You can go experience that museum. You can go see that thing. You can go snorkel or scuba dive or who knows what you want to do in that particular ocean or lake or whatever. You want to be able to do those things. Something that you've never done before, something you really want to experience in life. If you're unable to do those things, it's not quite as good a life, okay? Let's keep going. A work-life balance. That's always nice to have because we obviously talked about having the money we need to do, but we don't want to be workaholics. We don't want to be stuck in the cubicle, all those different things. So we want to have a good balance between those two things. Purpose and contribution. So going earlier, it said spirituality and service. So like that greater power, we do some service. But even more here, I gain my personal purpose through the contributions I make. So now I'm looking for validation from other people. It's not just me serving a greater power. I want other people to recognize what I have done and what I've been able to do for other people, and I gain some sort of standing or stature through this. So now it's a little more personalized in what do I look like out of this, not what do I reflect onto a higher power. Okay, just a little difference in there, but you can probably pick up on where you might have heard similar things like that before. Now, not only to your having money for the now, but you want to have money for the later. We want to have a stable retirement. A good life means that when I retire at whatever age that may be, I am set and I'm comfortable. I'm well taken care of. Okay, that's another item that most people would see as the good life. So now, if you look through that list, there's not a lot there that on the surface we would look at and go, well, that's a bad thing, is it? No. I mean, there's nothing really that I go, ooh, that's directly against something that I've read in the Bible. But it is much more generalized than what we're going to look at here in a second. There's still a lot more of the how it reflects on me or what I'm able to get out of it than it is what I'm contributing or part of or who it reflects on. And in our case, we would say that's a reflection on God or Christ. It still reflects more on me as a person. So, nothing really bad out of this, but maybe it's not the depth that we're really going to look into when we consider what is the good life according to Christ. What is He looking at and drawing us towards? But at least when we look at that, maybe it allows us to reflect on what we would answer and say, okay, maybe I'm not so different. Maybe that is common. Maybe you can release a little bit of the pain of guilt when you go, oh, but I really would like that. Okay, that's okay. That's normal. Okay, we all would love these sort of things in our life. And again, there's nothing inherently evil about any of them. Okay, but let's keep going. Not only how do we view it today, but before we can clearly see Christ's messages, what did people in their day and time, in the 100, 200 years leading up to Christ, leading to the popular teachings, what did they think the good life looked like? Now, here's something that I found really interesting. This was from a writing from a guy named Ben Sira. He wrote it roughly 200 years before Christ, but it was a very popular writing during Christ's time. And in fact, it's one of the largest, most well-preserved pieces of wisdom writing of anything of antiquity. And it was written to the people around Christ and in his day and age. Okay? And here we go. A good life is someone who rejoices in his children, who lives with a reasonable wife. Interpret that the way it sounds. All right? This guy meant that. I'm not saying I meant it, but he did. Lives with a reasonable wife. Here's one. Sees the downfall of his enemies. Not only do we want peace and freedom like we talked about earlier, we want to see the downfall of our enemies. Never has to serve an inferior. Again, you can kind of hear how we had that in the modern, answers that I brought up, but here he's saying it a little more straightforward. I never want to have to serve an inferior. A good life means you're always the top dog in your life situation. You find friends, you speak, and people listen. You have some authority in the world that you live in. And then at the end, fears Yahweh. Okay? So you can hear some things in there that you go, oh, what was he living through? But again, remember, this is kind of when different world powers were shifting. You, as your nation, may be oppressed by someone else. You may have an invading force coming. This is also a guy who his family would have lived through several times of being oppression or in slavery. Who knows if his family was part of the people who lived in Babylon or they were the ones who lived in Jerusalem when all the walls were torn down. We don't know those details. But you can imagine that life experience has led to some of these things that we have there on that list. He wants some security in his life. That would be a good life. Now, just a slightly different take. This was from a list found in the Dead Sea Scrolls where they were describing what people should ascribe to and strive towards in their life. Attends to the Torah, no outbursts of foolishness, attains wisdom, and walks in the way of the Most High. So here we have a group of people from the similar area, but they were more dedicated to living out a very moral life in the way of following the Torah laws, enough that they had separated themselves from most of society in order to attain those things. So they aren't as concerned about some of the other things that were on the list, but they are very focused on God's law and how closely they followed it. So those were some of the main things that were floating around in the air when Christ comes on the scene and he begins to describe to this group of people as they sit down and they're ready to listen to the teacher, and they're going, okay, what's he got to share with us? And so here's what he covers. So we're going to read through this. You've got your Bibles open. We're going to read these verses together, and then we'll walk through them a little bit one at a time here. But this is the Sermon on the Mount, as we title it, starting in verse 1 of chapter 5. Seeing the crowds, he, Jesus, went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. He opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." All right, so we're going to break this down and look at those individually real quick. We're not going to do a deep dive, but I just want you to recognize some of the things he points out and keep in mind some of the things we've already gone through, whether that's the political power, the personal worth, the ability for other people to see you and comment on you and think about how you fit into their life or how you've benefited their life, and all these other things about comfort and prosperity. And let's look at what Christ is calling us towards. Okay, number one, to be poor in spirit. Right off the bat, do we like the word poor in general? Most people don't like to be poor in anything. But that's the first thing Christ tells them. Again, in this time where Matthew has been building up this prophet, this teacher, this king, this savior, and he's pointed out how important he is. And the first thing that Christ does when he sits everybody down, he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Can you imagine how the audience reacted to that first line? And it's like maybe confusion, maybe curiosity, maybe some were immediately turned off. They're like, "Nope, that's enough for me, not my bag," and they left. We don't know, but this would not be what you would expect out of most teachers at that time. Let's keep going. Blessed are those who mourn. Those of you who have been through times of mourning, is that a fun, enjoyable experience? Was that something we enjoyed doing or we wanted to spend more time doing? Well, no, of course not. But Jesus says this is a life that is blessed. We're going to explore it a little more, but let's keep looking here at this list. Someone who is meek. Now, meek is a weird word for us. We debate what it means, and whatever the meaning is and however we get to it, it's not something we like because it generally means that you're in a lesser position than someone else. It means that someone may be oppressing you or pushing in on you, but you have an attitude that takes it or handles it well. Either way, remember what Ben Sira was talking about. You never have to be under someone else. You speak and other people listen. Those pieces of authority, this is in direct competition with that. It's going right in the opposite direction. And Jesus says this is something that recognizes, or we should recognize as a good life. Someone who hungers and thirsts for righteousness. Now again, hunger and thirst, do we like those feelings? Generally not. But Jesus says not only is it a hunger and a thirst, but it's a hunger and a thirst for righteousness, for right relationships, for right living, for rightness in your relationship with God. Hunger and thirst. So it's something that is an agitation that is driving you forward. But in general, we don't like that sort of feeling. Let's keep going. To be merciful. Now that one, okay. That's a good thing. We like to be, someone show mercy to me. The mercy to other people may be a little more difficult, but we can see that that's probably a good thing. To be pure in heart, man, I like that one. That one feels really good. Okay, I'm going to be pure in heart about things. But imagine how hard it is to truly be pure in heart, to question your own personal motives, to think about what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're doing this for other people. When you really get to thinking about it, it causes a lot of introspection to happen that can be very uncomfortable for people. But to be pure in heart is a great thing. To be a peacemaker, man, that one's hard. Now, I like peace to be around me. Again, we had lots of responses that said a peaceful life is something we love, but do I really want to be the person to have to do it? Do I want to be the person causing peace to happen or working towards peace? Because if you think about it, how often is the peacemaker's life very peaceful? At least until the job is accomplished. Usually you kind of have to put yourself in the middle of a lot of things and work out some things and say some things and do some things that you wish someone else would really take care of. Persecuted for righteousness. So again, if you're the person working towards peace and you're putting yourself in the middle of things, you're probably going to catch some flack from many sides. And if you're doing it for the sake of Christ, for the sake of these right relationships, Christ is saying, you will be persecuted, but that's a good life if you're persecuted for righteousness. Now, if you're always stirring up trouble, that's on you. But if you're persecuted for the sake of righteousness, if you're working towards my ends, as Christ would be putting it, that is a good life. And this last one, he says, not only will you be persecuted for righteous living, will people see that you look different, that you act different, that you're striving towards other things, but you will be reviled because of me, because you are following me, because you are saying my name, because you're taking on my name. These are things that people will not like you for. Now take a look at that list for just a second. And how different is that from what we've been looking at in the world around us? Now again, nothing that we talked about in those other lists were inherently bad, from the people that I asked to respond here this past month. But are they asking for some of the struggle that Christ seems to be calling his followers into? Most of what we would call a good life is, again, free from some of those heartaches, free from those struggles, free from those pains. But Christ says, I want you to look at the people who are going through these things, and I want you to recognize that that is the truly good life, especially the good life in my name, okay? So we have this list, and you could look at it this way. Every time Christ, if you've got your Bible open, have this up real quick. And every time he would say one of these things, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The response would be someone would look at someone who is poor in spirit, and they could say, how blessed is the person living in such a way that they're going to receive God's blessings. Read that again. Blessed are the poor in spirit. How blessed is the person who's poor in spirit? For theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Because they will receive a blessing that only God can provide. How blessed is the poor in spirit? They're living in a way that they are downtrodden because they recognize the lack of something. They don't have power. They don't have God's Spirit within them. All these different things that we could really dig into and discuss. Blessed is that person who recognizes that lack, because they're about to be blessed by God in ways that we can't imagine and that only God can provide. Another way of putting that is we could say, look at the person who is living a good life. They're receiving provisions from God. They're receiving things only God provides. And we can go through each one of these in that same way. Blessed is the person who hungers and thirsts for righteousness. Blessed is that person living a truly good life. They're hungering and thirsting for righteousness. And why is that a good life? They will be satisfied. And that's not a satisfaction that they can provide for themselves. It's not that they can go to the market and get their food and be filled. It's not that they can go to their friend's house and have a good conversation and be filled. It's not that they can attain some standing or stature in their community and now be filled. It's they have gone to God after his righteousness. They've sought his good things, and he has filled them in the way that only he can. So when we look through this list, we now say, okay, now I get it. The life looks a little different, but they're going to receive blessings that only God provides, and there's no other way to get it. It boils down to this concept of holy living, being set apart for God. It's not something you're doing for yourself. It's not something you're doing for your friends. It's not something you're doing even for your community. It's you are living for God. Now, all those other things may come into place when God is put in his right place in your life, but this is holy living he is calling us to. Being set apart for his purpose, for his lifestyle, for whatever it may be, that's what he's calling us to. So when Jesus is outlining this for his disciples, he's trying to say very clearly, I'm calling you to live for God. Now, you may have read the Torah, you may have read all these things, you may have sat under some great teachers before that kind of excused things or moved things around or said, in general, this is what we're striving towards, but these things are okay. But I want you to do this solely for the sake of your God in heaven. That is holy living. That is completely being set apart. A beatitude in general, this is a rough idea of the meaning of the word. Complete happiness that comes from being blessed or made holy by God. So again, even as odd as some of those things may sound, as hard as they may be in our life, that's the only way that true happiness, a truly blessed life, is going to come about. You're being made holy, you're being set apart, you're living for the holiness of God. So, this is the good, blessed, holy life. But here's the key part to it. It's not tied to any particular context. Because we could say, oh, well, we've now looked at something that was written 200 years before Christ. We're now reading the words of Christ. And then we've considered something during, the political turmoil of the 60s and 70s, and we're considering the way that our life in this, postmodern context here in 2024, all these different things. Well, of course, that's going to shift what a good life is, right? I mean, think about it. You've just come out of captivity at one point in this timeline, and then you're under Roman rule, and then you've had, name your president, name your nation, name your whatever. Shouldn't that change what a good life looks like? Because the world around changed. So how does that impact you? And Christ is saying very clearly, if you are living for God's holiness, it does not matter what the context is you're living in. His rules, his holiness, his expectations are going to be the same because we're striving after him. Now, I know that's difficult for us because we like to shift and change things depending on, well, where I live and what I have, and you don't know me, and all these other things that we tend to bring up. But I want us to picture the people that Jesus is talking to for just a moment. Again, this is going to be mainly Israelite people. Now, we're told that John the Baptist had some who came to follow him that were the Pharisees, that were kind of the highest teachers. He did have some Roman soldiers who came out and were checking in on things and were kind of interested by what John the Baptist said. So we can imagine that the same would have been true for this first crowd that Jesus is teaching to. It's going to be mainly Israelites, but a smattering of different people from different contexts that were just curious what this great teacher was teaching about. But to all of those different people, whether they were the oppressed or possibly the oppressor, whether that was through military power or political power, or they were the tax collectors like Matthew himself as the writer, all of these different people sat down at the feet of Jesus and he said, these are the expectations I have for each and every one of you. And they're going to look very different than the expectations of the world around you. Whether you are the Roman, are the Israelite, you're the Samaritan, you're the whatever those things are that your parents told you, your grandparents told you, your higher ups tell you, whether you're striving for eventually having your freedom from some sort of servitude or slavery, or you're the person who is trying to acquire more slaves and servitude and amass the money in your bank account, all of those different things, I want you to look like this. I want you to be meek. I want you to be hungry. I want you to be ready for persecution. I want you to take my name above all others and be ready for whatever comes to you out of that. And you can continue to go down that list. And every time you dig into each one of those things, it has this simultaneous something that's going to be in today's day and age, like something you're going to have to deal with in the here and now, but also a spiritual component of what you're going to have to go through. So you may be spiritually oppressed. You may not have God's full spirit with you right now. And because of that, you're meek, you're lowly, you're hurting. Well, a lot of times that's probably going to accompany something physical where you feel oppressed and lonely. You don't feel like you have the power to really handle your situation. So they're going to hear both of those at the same time, and Christ is saying to them, but by serving me, I'm going to carry you through whatever those hardships are, whatever those struggles are, and there will be great blessings that only God provides by living that lifestyle. That truly good life, you think you're living, you think by amassing all the wealth you're going to be okay. That's nothing compared to the wealth of the kingdom that I have prepared for you. You think that by seeing all the great experiences and doing all the amazing things that you have around you, that's going to be the good life. That's nothing compared to seeing God. And that's what he was drawing those people to. And so I just want you to consider, for his first message to these people, he lays out a very countercultural lifestyle. He says this is going to look different than anything you're doing around you. And he's telling us today at any point in time. Because even today, if we read back through this, how often do we see people put into high places of power who are pure in heart? How often are the pure in heart the people that are the most celebrated in the world around us? Now, who do you love to be around? Of course, you love to be around people who are pure in heart. We see and recognize that. But as a world driving force, that's not the thing that is the most celebrated. And yet, Christ says that's who we should be. How often do we see the peacemakers as the people who are celebrated in the world around us? Well, pick up a newspaper, pick up anything, pick up a book. If it starts out with this nice, kind, and gentle, hey, I'm going to walk through this, it's not probably going to sell much. It's not going to get many clicks. We like the things that stir us up. We like the things that stir the pot, that change things over. And so the peacemakers are not often the most celebrated. But again, who do we want to be around? We want to be around peacemakers. The person who's always causing trouble, we're kind of like, oh, do I have to be with them again? So we see the universality of this. We see the good in this, but we also understand that it's not going to be the waters we swim in. We're going to swim in waters that work against these things. No one wants to be persecuted. No one wants to be reviled. No one wants to mourn the hurt and the pain and the struggle and the way things don't match up with what God has called them to be. No one wants to live in that. But that's exactly what Christ is calling his followers to. Because again, here's the list of blessings: the kingdom of heaven, complete comfort, an inheritance beyond anything we could imagine, satisfaction, mercy, the sight of God, being a son of God, and this great kingdom where we can live in eternal security and peace. Those are amazing blessings that would be worth any one at any time period, but they're only available if we're following this version of the good life. They're only available for the people who strive after being a set-apart, holy people of God rather than a person in whatever context you're in. A Jew under the Roman rule, an American under our democracy. Name your list, name your place, name your time. This is something that was always going to work against what was going on, but it's not out of our reach. Too often we go, oh, but because of this context, it was just an ideal that Jesus put out there. It's a pretty picture, but there's no way I could really live after any of this. But that's not what Jesus was doing. Jesus was not laying out a new idealistic law that he thought, well, this will be nice for them to hear, but there's no way they can ever do any of it. Jesus was sitting down with people, and as he began to teach, he was saying, this is what I know you're capable of. This is what I'm calling you towards. This is what I will help you live out. And as we go throughout, he didn't then leave us alone. And so I'm going to kind of skip ahead because we can't make it through the whole book of Matthew. We can't even make it through the whole Sermon on the Mount this morning. But Jesus promised that he wouldn't leave us alone to try to do this on our own, did he? He said when he left, a great helper would come with us. So for all who strive after, who all seek to attain this, who want to live the good life as Jesus laid out, he says, my Spirit is there for you. He's going to be with you. He's going to help you. It's an amazing thing. So many times we have the good life laid before us with no hope and no help, and it's kind of make it up on your own, figure it out on your own, see if you can get there, good luck. But that's not what Christ did for us. And so I hope that you can see the joy and the beauty in the good life that Christ called us to. I hope that maybe you can think about it a little bit closer this next week, really dig into it and see if it's something that you're striving towards or if it's something that you've kind of picked and chosen through there and you've been like, yeah, I like, verse 6, but 7, I don't know about that one. This wasn't a pick and choose, dot it all out. This was the good life as a whole. And I pray that we can see that in other people. We can encourage them as they work after this, as they try to live it out. And I pray that we can encourage each other, knowing that we have the church, individually we have the Spirit, and we have so many great blessings that await us, not only here and now, but in the great forever. It's an amazing thing that Christ laid out as his first thing that he wanted to share with those who would follow him. So, Matthew's a great book. I would encourage you to be reading through it, looking at it. Jesus teaches us some amazing things there. And the good thing is we get to continue on in our service a little bit later, and Dustin is going to be preaching about how sweet it is or how wonderful it is to recognize all the different things that he has provided for us and that have been provided for us through this plan of God. So the life we live, the plans that he has for us are wonderful blessings, again, that we only have in God. So thanks for being here for the study this morning. We're going to take a break for just a little bit, and then we'll be back to worship here in just a bit. Y'all are dismissed.